If you compare images of Akhenaten with other depictions of pharaohs, you'll notice that Akhenaten looks very different.
Scientists reconstructed the face of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, and the result stunned experts around the world. Around 1353 BCE, Pharaoh Akhenaten rose to power and completely transformed Egypt. He abandoned the traditional gods, established the worship of the Aten, and built a new capital at Akhetaten, modern Amarna. But what puzzled historians most was not his religion, it was his appearance. His statues showed an elongated skull, high cheekbones, wide hips, and unusually soft facial features unlike any other Egyptian king. For more than 3,000 years, scholars debated whether these features were symbolic or a true reflection of his body. Then, in 2010, a landmark DNA and CT scan study led by Dr. Zahi Hawass and Dr. Yehi Agad, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, examined royal mummies from the 18th dynasty. But before we uncover what the scientists found, please subscribe to our channel and help us reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories hidden beneath the pages of history. The findings confirmed Akhenaten's family relationships and reopened one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Had his artists been showing the real man all along? The answer would reveal a hidden genetic story that Egypt's rulers tried to erase forever. The erased face walk into any museum storeroom that preserves fragments from Akhenaten's reign, whether in Cairo, London, Berlin, or New York, and the first thing that strikes you is a feeling that something is profoundly different. Even before you read the label beneath the stone, the face itself demands your attention. Curators have spent generations studying these sculptures, and many admit there is something unsettling about them that is difficult to explain. Visitors often stop without knowing why, staring at features unlike those of any other Egyptian ruler. These broken statues, recovered from the ruins of Amarna after centuries buried beneath desert sand, all tell the same strange story. High cheekbones cut sharp as broken glass, heavy-lidded eyes that seem permanently tired, lips stretched unnaturally wide across a long, narrow face, an elongated skull, unlike the ideal proportions seen on every king before him, narrow shoulders, wide hips, a rounded stomach, and a body that blurs nearly every traditional line between masculine and feminine. These are not random artistic choices scattered across different workshops. The same features appear again and again on colossal statues, temple reliefs, limestone carvings, and palace walls created by dozens of artists over nearly 2 decades. They are so consistent that they appear to describe one real individual rather than an artistic fantasy. These are not the faces of immortal gods. They are the face of one specific human being, and every instinct tells you that something about him does not fit the Egypt we thought we knew. That man was Akhenaten, one of history's most controversial rulers. Around 1353 BCE, during the 18th dynasty, he inherited an empire that stretched from the Nile deep into the Near East. Egypt stood at the height of its military strength and economic power under the legacy of his father, Amenhotep III. Most new pharaohs would have protected that stability, honoring the ancient traditions that had ruled Egypt for nearly 2,000 years. Akhenaten chose the opposite path. Around the 5th year of his reign, he declared that the sun disk known as the Aten would become the supreme focus of royal worship. By approximately his 13th regnal year, the transformation had become absolute. He ordered the temples of Amun, Egypt's most powerful god, to close. Think about what that meant. Amun was not simply another deity among many. He was the king of the Egyptian pantheon, worshipped from Nubia to the Mediterranean. His temples employed thousands of priests, craftsmen, scribes, farmers, and laborers. They controlled enormous estates, collected taxes, owned ships, and possessed wealth rivaling that of the royal palace itself. Yet Akhenaten issued decrees that stripped those temples of their lands, confiscated their income, dismissed their priests, and erased Amun's name from monuments throughout the kingdom. Religious festivals that had united Egyptian society for centuries disappeared almost overnight. The very rituals that people believed kept the universe in balance were suddenly declared forbidden. Akhenaten did not stop with religion. He erased part of his own identity. His birth name, Amenhotep, meaning Amun is satisfied, directly honored the very god he was now trying to eliminate. Orders were issued to chisel that name from monuments and replace it with Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. Then he made an even more astonishing decision. He abandoned Thebes, Egypt's ancient religious capital, leaving behind its magnificent temples and centuries of royal history. Instead, he ordered an entirely new city to be built in an empty stretch of desert that had never before held a major settlement. The city was named Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, today known as Amarna. Archaeological evidence shows the city rose with astonishing speed between roughly 1348 and 1346 BCE. 14 massive boundary stelae were carved directly into the surrounding cliffs, permanently marking the sacred limits of the new capital. Vast open-air temples replaced the dark sanctuaries of traditional Egyptian worship, allowing sunlight itself to flood every altar. Every wall proclaimed the glory of the Aten. Every inscription reinforced the king's unique role as the only living intermediary between humanity and his god. This was not a minor religious reform. It was one of the most radical revolutions ever attempted by a ruler of the ancient world. Yet the strangest thing about Akhetaten was not the disappearance of Egypt's old gods. It was the astonishing way the king chose to be portrayed. Everywhere archaeologists excavated, whether inside palaces, temples, workshops, or private homes, Akhenaten's image appeared with the same impossible proportions. His skull stretched backward. His face became longer than tradition allowed. His neck appeared unusually thin. His hips widened dramatically. His stomach softened. His limbs became elongated and almost delicate. For nearly 2,000 years, Egyptian royal art had followed strict religious rules. Every pharaoh was depicted as eternally youthful, physically perfect, broad-shouldered, muscular, and divinely masculine, regardless of age or appearance. Those rules were not simply artistic preferences. They reflected Egypt's belief that the king was the earthly embodiment of divine perfection. Breaking those conventions was almost unthinkable. Yet Akhenaten instructed his artists to abandon everything that had defined royal portraiture for generations. Instead of idealizing the king, they repeatedly carved a face and body unlike anything seen before or since. Something had changed in Egypt's most powerful ruler, and for the first time in history, his artists were being allowed, perhaps even ordered, to show it exactly as they saw it. The question that has haunted archaeologists for more than a century is simple. Were these sculptures recording a symbolic religious message, or were they preserving the appearance of the real man behind the crown? The forbidden body. The mystery deepened when archaeologists discovered evidence that Akhenaten himself may have ordered artists to abandon nearly every rule that had governed Egyptian royal art for almost 2,000 years. Fragments of limestone reliefs recovered from Amarna, together with unfinished sculptures found in the workshop of the royal sculptor Thutmose, suggest that artists were instructed to portray the king in an entirely new way. Instead of creating the timeless, muscular, broad-shouldered image every pharaoh had demanded before him, they were encouraged to show the ruler as he truly appeared. Whether that instruction was written as a formal royal decree or conveyed through the artistic reforms of the Amarna court remains debated, but the result is unmistakable. Every surviving statue follows the same extraordinary pattern. Stand before one of these colossal sculptures today, and it immediately feels different from every other royal monument in Egypt. The skull stretches backward into an elongated shape unlike traditional royal portraits. The shoulders slope downward instead of projecting strength. The hips flare wider than those of any earlier pharaoh, even rivaling the proportions normally reserved for queens. The stomach hangs softly over the royal kilt. The chest appears swollen rather than muscular. Long, delicate fingers extend from unusually thin hands. The neck is impossibly slender, and the face itself seems to exist somewhere between masculine and feminine, as though the sculptors intentionally erased the visual boundaries that had defined Egyptian kingship for centuries. It is the kind of image that refuses to leave your mind because every instinct keeps insisting something is different. What makes these statues even more extraordinary is that the same appearance spreads throughout the entire royal household. Reliefs carved between roughly 1348 and 1336 BCE show Queen Nefertiti with the same elongated skull, prominent jawline, and graceful neck. Their 6 daughters are portrayed with similarly stretched heads, thin limbs, rounded stomachs, and delicate features, creating the impression that the entire family shared one distinctive physical appearance. Whether these proportions reflected genuine anatomy, artistic symbolism, or a combination of both, has become one of Egyptology's greatest debates. Foreign ambassadors arriving from Mitanni, Babylon, and the Hittite Empire would have expected to see the familiar image of an Egyptian warrior king. Instead, they entered palaces whose walls were covered with figures unlike anything found elsewhere in the ancient world. Contemporary diplomatic letters from the Amarna archive reveal that Egypt's foreign relationships became increasingly strained during Akhenaten's reign. And although those tablets never describe his appearance directly, later historians have long wondered how foreign visitors interpreted these astonishing public images. Some scholars believe the king deliberately reshaped royal art to symbolize the creative power of the Aten, combining masculine and feminine qualities within one divine ruler. Others argue the style reflected an intentional rejection of centuries of rigid artistic conventions. But another possibility lingered beneath the surface, one few researchers wanted to embrace. What if these sculptures were not symbolic at all? What if they were recording the appearance of the real man standing on Egypt's throne? That question mattered because Egyptian royal portraiture had never worked this way before. Since the beginning of the Old Kingdom, kings had been depicted as eternally perfect. Broad shoulders represented strength. Narrow hips symbolized masculine authority. Powerful jaws projected divine confidence. Age, illness, and physical weakness were almost completely erased from official monuments, because the pharaoh was considered the earthly embodiment of cosmic order itself. Gods did not grow old. Gods did not appear fragile. Gods certainly did not possess bodies that challenged accepted ideals of masculinity. If Akhenaten intentionally abandoned those rules, then his artistic revolution was doing far more than introducing a new style. It was revealing something deeply personal about the king himself. In that sense, every statue became less like propaganda and more like a confession carved into stone. Yet, whatever those monuments were trying to preserve, later generations clearly wanted it erased. Within only a few years of Akhenaten's death, his temples were dismantled, his city abandoned, his monuments smashed into thousands of fragments, and his name systematically removed from official king lists. The rulers who followed him acted as though he had never existed. Before we uncover why modern science forced historians to reopen this mystery, make sure you subscribe and help us reach 5,000 subscribers, because what comes next is the evidence hidden beneath 3,000 years of desert sand. The contradiction became impossible to ignore after one of archaeology's greatest discoveries. In November 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the nearly intact tomb of Tutankhamun inside the Valley of the Kings. The golden funerary mask that stunned the world presented a completely different image of royalty. Every feature followed the traditional Egyptian ideal. The face was perfectly symmetrical. The jaw was strong. The proportions were balanced. Nothing about the mask hinted at the elongated skull, broad hips, or soft body seen throughout Akhenaten's monuments. It was as though Egyptian artists had immediately abandoned the Amarna style the moment Akhenaten disappeared from history. The contrast raised an obvious question. If Akhenaten's appearance had simply been artistic symbolism, why erase it so completely? And if those statues reflected reality, why did his successors work so hard to replace them with idealized images? The only way to answer that question was to stop studying statues and begin studying the body itself. The sealed Lab 1 of the most important clues had actually been discovered years earlier. In 1907, British archaeologist Edward R. Ayrton, working for Theodore M. Davis, uncovered a heavily damaged tomb known today as KV 55 in the Valley of the Kings. Almost nothing inside remained untouched. The royal coffin had been smashed. The gilded face had been ripped away. Royal names had been deliberately erased from the inscriptions. Whoever entered the tomb in antiquity had gone to extraordinary lengths to destroy the identity of the person buried there. For decades, Egyptologists argued fiercely over whether the skeleton belonged to Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, or another forgotten royal. Yet despite the destruction, the bones themselves continued to speak. The skull appeared unusually long. The jaw resembled the facial proportions carved on Amarna statues. The body was slender, matching many of the artistic depictions. At the same time, physical anthropologists pointed out that many of these characteristics still fell within the broad range of normal human variation. That disagreement fueled more than a century of scientific controversy. As researchers searched for explanations, dozens of medical theories emerged. Some suggested Marfan syndrome, a connective tissue disorder that can produce unusually long limbs and fingers. Others proposed Froelich syndrome, hormonal disorders, gynecomastia, pituitary tumors, endocrine abnormalities, or even childhood developmental conditions. Still others argued that no medical condition existed at all, insisting the entire Amarna style was symbolic religious art with little connection to Akhenaten's real appearance. Every theory gained supporters. Every theory generated academic papers and public debate. And every theory eventually encountered evidence it could not fully explain. By the beginning of the 21st century, archaeologists realized that traditional methods had reached their limit. Statues could not answer the question. Ancient texts were incomplete. Medical speculation remained inconclusive. Only the mummy itself could settle the debate. That opportunity finally arrived inside one of Egypt's most secure research facilities. Beginning in the late 2000s, a multidisciplinary team led by renowned Egyptologist Dr. Zahi Hawass and molecular geneticist Dr. Yehi Agad launched the most comprehensive genetic investigation ever conducted on Egypt's New Kingdom royal family. Ancient DNA research had long been considered nearly impossible because Egypt's extreme heat rapidly degrades genetic material, and contamination from modern handlers can overwhelm surviving DNA. The team spent nearly 2 years developing contamination control procedures rigorous enough to withstand international scientific scrutiny. They selected 11 royal mummies, including Tutankhamun, the mysterious KV-55 individual, the mummy known as the Younger Lady, and several other members of the 18th dynasty, whose family relationships remained uncertain. Every specimen was transported under strict chain of custody protocols supervised by Egyptian authorities. DNA samples were extracted primarily from teeth and dense cortical bone, where genetic material survives better than in softer tissues. Every result was independently repeated, blind-tested, and verified before being accepted. Researchers analyzed mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome markers, and autosomal microsatellite profiles, allowing them to reconstruct biological relationships with unprecedented confidence. Their complete methodology would later be published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, in 2010, opening every stage of the investigation to scientific review. Then came the moment the team had spent years preparing for. The sequencing machines completed their work, and the genetic profiles appeared on the laboratory screens. After decades of archaeological debate, hundreds of academic arguments, and more than 3,000 years of unanswered questions, the evidence was finally ready to reveal exactly who the mysterious occupant of KV-55 really was, and what the royal bloodline had been hiding all along. The bloodline exposed. When the laboratory completed its final round of testing, the debate that had divided Egyptologists for more than a century came to an abrupt end. The conclusions were not based on artistic interpretation, historical opinion, or damaged inscriptions carved thousands of years earlier. They were written into the DNA itself. After hundreds of extraction attempts, repeated sequencing runs, and extensive contamination checks, the researchers compared millions of genetic markers across the royal mummies. Every result was independently verified before the study moved forward. Likelihood ratios climbed far beyond the threshold expected by coincidence. Autosomal DNA markers aligned perfectly across multiple chromosomes. Mitochondrial DNA, inherited exclusively through the maternal line, matched exactly where it should. Y chromosome markers confirmed a continuous paternal lineage. Piece by piece, the evidence assembled itself into a family tree that historians had spent 3 millennia trying to reconstruct. For the first time since the fall of the 18th dynasty, the relationships between Egypt's most famous royal mummies could be established through modern genetics rather than ancient royal inscriptions. The mysterious mummy from K555 was identified as the biological father of Tutankhamun, while the mummy known as the Younger Lady was identified as his biological mother. At first glance, that discovery seemed perfectly ordinary. Every royal dynasty depends on kings producing heirs. Nothing about a father, a mother, and a son appeared unusual. But when the researchers extended the family tree 1 generation further, the results stunned even those working inside the laboratory. The DNA revealed that KV-55 and the Younger Lady were not distant relatives, nor were they half-siblings, a practice already known within parts of the Egyptian royal family. They shared both parents. They were full biological brother and sister, born to the same royal mother and the same royal father before eventually producing Tutankhamun. The genetic evidence supporting that relationship proved exceptionally strong, with probability values leaving virtually no room for an alternative explanation.